Okay, let's dive into this incredible story from 7th century Arabia. It's a tense political drama about treaties, conspiracies, and the ultimate price of broken trust. So what does happen when a diplomatic visit turns out to be a trap? That question is right at the heart of what we're talking about today. We're going to unpack how a peace agreement unraveled into a full-blown assassination plot, completely changing the future of Medina. Alright, so let's set the scene. We're in Medina, right after the Battle of Uhud. The Muslim community, well, they were looking a little weak after that fight, and the tribe of Banu Nadir saw this as their golden opportunity to shake things up. So what did? They started acting against the very city they called home, becoming secret informants. They were leaking critical intelligence, the best places to attack Medina, the movements of the Muslim community, to hostile tribes. They were breaking their most solemn promise. And you really have to understand the terms of this treaty. This is not a one-sided deal at all. It was a mutual defense pact. The Muslims provided security for everyone in the city, and in return, the Banu Nadir pledged their loyalty and financial help. Both sides had very clear obligations. Now, when rumors of this conspiracy get to the Prophet, he doesn't just send in the troops, which honestly would have been a pretty standard response back then. Instead, he chooses diplomacy. He decides to go visit the Banu Nadir fortress himself. The official reason for this visit, the cover story, if you will, centered on this concept called dayats, or blood money. It was a totally normal legal practice used to compensate a victim's family. Here's what happened. A Muslim had accidentally killed 2 men who were supposed to be under state protection. That meant the Muslim community owed compensation, and their treaty said that the wealthy Banu Nadir had to chip in. So this gave the Prophet a perfect, totally legitimate, non-confrontational reason for the visit. Right, but underneath that public reason was a secret mission. The Prophet needed to gather intel, to see for himself just how deep this conspiracy went and who else was involved. So this visit had 2 very different purposes. So, picture this. The Prophet arrives, and the leaders of Banu Nadir greet him warmly. It's all smiles and promises. They agree right away to help with the blood money. But this whole welcome, it was a complete sham. Because while the Prophet was waiting outside, their leaders were huddled up inside the fortress, and the conversation got dark fast. They saw this as the perfect chance to take him out. Their plan was, well, it was brutally simple. Drop a giant rock on him from the roof. But not everyone thought this was a brilliant idea. A tribal leader named Salam ibn Mishkam basically pleaded with them, saying it was a reckless, stupid plan. He warned them that the Prophet would somehow find out about their plot. And look, Salam laid out all the risks. First, he pointed out that the Prophet had a weird knack for uncovering plots. But second, and way more practically, he reminded them that just attempting this was treason. It would blow up their treaty, and according to the very terms they had signed, it would mean giving up their lives and all their property. And right in the middle of their argument, something just changes. The Prophet, whether he sensed the danger or, as tradition says, was warned by the angel Gabriel, he just gets up and walks away. No goodbye, no explanation, he's just gone, leaving everyone, his friends and his would-be assassins, totally stunned. So, with the Prophet gone, the jig is up. The plot is exposed. And you can just imagine the panic among the Banu Nadir leaders. They knew they had crossed a line. Their treason wasn't a rumor anymore, it was out in the open. The response from Medina came back fast, but it wasn't a declaration of war, it was an ultimatum. The message was simple and direct. You tried to kill the head of state. You broke the pact that guaranteed your safety. You can't be trusted to live here anymore. You have to leave. At first, the tribe refused. They dug in their heels and barricaded themselves inside their fortresses, ready for a fight. In response, the Muslims set up a blockade, cutting them off and just applying pressure. The standoff didn't last very long. The Banu Nadir eventually surrendered. Now, it's worth noting there are a couple of versions of how this siege actually ended. One minority report says a small fight broke out when the tribe tried to attack the blockade, and about 10 of them were killed. But, and this is important, the vast majority of historical sources agree that the siege ended peacefully. There was no big battle. The Banu Nadir saw that their position was hopeless and chose to surrender and accept exile without any more bloodshed. Okay, so the Banu Nadir are gone, but that leaves a pretty big question. What do you do with all the valuable property, the fortresses, the date palm farms that they left behind? Well, the answer to that question lies with a group called the Muhajirin. These were the Muslim refugees from Mecca. They had fled persecution, leaving literally everything behind. For years, they'd been living in poverty in Medina, relying on the charity of others. So the process that unfolded was actually pretty straightforward and based on the laws of the time. The lands were forfeited because of their treason, and because they were acquired without a big battle, the prophet got to decide what to do with them. And he chose to solve the city's refugee crisis by giving the land to the poorest of the muhajirin. And this is just brilliant, really. One crisis was used to solve another. For the first time since they fled Mecca, these refugee families had homes, they had a source of income, and they finally had financial independence. Many even sold off parts of their new land to buy houses in the city center, becoming fully integrated into society. So the key thing to remember is that this outcome wasn't some random punishment pulled out of thin air. The consequence of losing their land for committing treason, it was spelled out in the very treaty they had signed. It was a known risk, a clause in the contract they chose to break. And all of this leaves us with a timeless question, one that echoes way beyond 7th century Arabia. When that fundamental trust between a state and some of its citizens is completely shattered by treason, what is the real price of making things secure again?
Back to the start.